Racism is bad, and South Africa is about to prove my point. Welcome to Kibbe on Liberty. Let's start with something really controversial. I'm against racism. I think it's bad. That's right. This is apparently controversial. If that makes me a bigot in your eyes, so be it. Ayn Rand argued correctly that racism is the most crudely primitive form of collectivism by judging entire groups of humans based on the color of their skin or their ancestry. MLK implored us to judge people based on the content of their character. But today, identity politics on the left and the counter-revolution on the so-called alt-right rejects Ayn Rand's, MLK's, and my view. What a huge step backwards for America. But if you think America has a problem, you ain't seen nothing yet. In South Africa, in the name of racial justice, Marxist radical Julius Malema has pushed through his plan to seize the lands of white farmers. The fundamental injustice of this so-called racial justice aside, this plan will surely create economic chaos and human suffering, just like we have seen for decades in neighboring Zimbabwe. South Africa practically wrote the book on racism and identity politics, historically having implemented brutal segregationist government policies that spread like a cancer to this day. During the years of apartheid, blacks and whites were forcibly segregated, denying blacks, the majority of the country's population, the basic economic and personal freedoms that we Americans take for granted. When the system was finally abolished in the early 1990s, many thought the country's racist heritage was behind it. Wishful thinking, I'm afraid. Far from embracing the rainbow society promised by Nelson Mandela, the new South African government has merely turned the tables on racism, with the state now promising to confiscate white-owned property without compensation. Let's hope a little sanity prevails in South Africa. Rourke has joined the show, as he always does at the most inappropriate time. I want to talk a little bit about our trip to South Africa last year. Free the People went meeting with the Free Market Foundation based in Johannesburg. We were also there with a number of other liberty leaders from across the continent of Africa. Ragnar has joined the show. What is with you guys? We're trying to do a show here. While we were there, we had a chance to talk to one of the directors of the Free Market Foundation, an awesome guy named Themba Nulashunga, and I'm butchering his name because I can't speak that language. Themba is particularly well positioned to discuss the bad ideas coming from these new Marxist radicals, because when he was a kid growing up in apartheid South Africa, he was a Marxist too. He was part of reading groups, reading Das Kapital from Karl Marx, and it wasn't until he discovered Milton Friedman and Walter Williams' South Africa's War on Capitalism, two free market economists. Milton Friedman made that very clear set of arguments. Walter Williams grabbed Themba's attention because here was a black guy suggesting that South Africa was fighting against capitalism, contrary to the theories of Marxism that he was being taught. Check out this interview that I did with him. I think Themba nails it, the intellectual influences that could make South Africa that shining city on the hill.
Remember at that time, black people had been economically castrated by the apartheid administration, and so they tended to see themselves as have-nots, and so that's how we saw ourselves. And so it was like Karl Marx was talking to us, and so that went on for quite a while. And then what changed that, it was quite a bit of a gradual process. What changed that was the fact that I was inquisitive as to why it was the case that there were people fleeing from the Warsaw Pact socialist countries, the socialist heavens socialist paradise, why they were living those countries for the imperialist, colonial and exploitative capitalist Western countries. What registered with me was the fact that there were all these refugees in a very desperate attempt to get over to the other side, many of them being killed in the process. And for me, that troubled me. That got me to really try to find out as to what was really happening. You know, leaving just the ideologies aside. And one of the first things that I did was to look for a book on capitalism, free markets. The first book that I got was Free to Choose by Milton Friedman. When I studied that book, now that book is written in such an axiomatic, self-explanatory manner that anybody who reads English, you know, just manages to read English, would make a sense, would understand of what was being said. And so I said to myself, oh, wait a minute, Themba, you've been missing the boat here. You know, somebody's not been telling you the truth. And so I could see from that look, it was the case indeed in terms of reality as to what was happening in the so-called capitalist countries. And that is, they were delivering the good things in life. They were delivering prosperity, the economy was booming, and that was not the case as contrasted with, say, the socialist bloc countries, especially Germany. That was a good contrast for me.
Themba doesn't lack for passion at all. And his point here, and these are a lot of the same books that you and I have probably read, but his point here is that the future for South Africa is really based on some pretty simple free market concepts. The rule of law and property rights. The rule of law and property rights allow for in a democratized form of economic prosperity that has nothing to do with the color of your skin. It doesn't even have that much to do with the legacy of apartheid. It's a great equalizer, and we've seen that in experiments from Hong Kong to here in the United States. But are they going to take that route? It doesn't look that way today. It's time for not fake news. Okay, the headline, South Africa, tomorrow Zimbabwe. This is from the American Conservative, a place that I go for really interesting takes on public policy, everything from foreign policy, in this case, what's going on in South Africa. And this particular article is really just a collection of other articles that analyze both what's happening in South Africa today with the proposed land grab and with what happened in Zimbabwe. The history is frightening. And here's what this article says. It first points out that Julius Malema, as recently as 2016, told his supporters that he was, quote, not calling for the slaughter of white people, at least not for now. So what do you think the ascending political party and leaders like Julius Malema with statements like that are doing to the economy and successful people, successful white people in South Africa? They're getting the hell out of there. They know what's coming. There's a brain drain, there's a talent drain, there's the potential of seeing a complete stagnation in the South African economy, which happens to be today one of the best across the continent of Africa. And if you want to know how this is going to work, all you got to do is look at Robert Mugabe in Zimbabwe. I've done stories about him in the past. Is he a fascist? Is he a Marxist? Is he a racist? He was all those things. And he used black resentment against white colonialism to take power in 1980. He promised not to screw with the market economy, but he immediately, upon taking power, took all the control. The country's economy in 1997 was the fastest growing in all of Africa. We're talking about Zimbabwe now. Now it is the fastest shrinking. A one-time net exporter of maize, cotton, beef, tobacco, roses, and sugarcane now exports only its educated professionals, who are fleeing by the tens of thousands. I should point out that this article was written before Mugabe was deposed just a month or two ago, something like that. And the devastation of these policies is pretty clear. Although Zimbabwe has some of the richest farmland in Africa, children with distended bellies have begun arriving at school looking like miniature pregnant women. How could the breadbasket of Africa have deteriorated so quickly into the continent's basket case? One of the dirty secrets of land confiscation, the claim is always that we're going to take land from white farmers and give it back to black people. That's not what happens in practice. The government takes the land from white farmers and keeps it for themselves. Here's what happened in Zimbabwe. The beneficiaries of the land seizures are, with few exceptions, ruling party officials and friends of the presidents. Although Mugabe's people seem to view the possession of farms as a sign of status, these elites don't have the experience, the equipment, or apparently the desire to run them. So like we've seen in Venezuela, like we've seen in Zimbabwe, all of these rich farmlands and all of this economic potential no longer produces food, and people starve. It's quite that simple because there's no property rights. There's no respect for the rule of law. If you actually work to build something, if you work to grow something, expect that the government, regardless of the color of your skin, is going to come in and steal your stuff. You know what? Nobody makes stuff. Nobody grows stuff when that happens. So I talked to some folks from Zimbabwe. Believe it or not, there are free market fighters in Zimbabwe who literally take their lives into their hands advocating for economic reforms and more property rights. I've talked to reformers in South Africa, and it's clear that everything is headed in the wrong direction right now. But you spend some time in this country and you realize that there's so much potential, there's so much opportunity, the people, the land, the resources, they could do so much in South Africa. I want to end the episode with a more optimistic view. One of Temba's colleagues, Leon Lowe, who was the founder of the Free Market Foundation, a free market economist who was one of the early white opponents of apartheid and one of the undying fighters for economic rationality and reason. He hosted us in South Africa, and I had a chance to talk to him, and here's how he thinks this is all going to play out. Check it out.
And so they are making these wild and crazy promises of nationalization without compensation, redistribution on purely blatantly racist discriminatory grounds. I, strangely enough, see this as a good thing. I think the sooner this ruling alliance collapses, and I think the sooner we go to having proper democratic contested elections, the better. And I think we are moving into being a mature democracy where people who go to the polls don't vote along racial lines, but they choose which party to vote for on the basis of that party's policies. And in the process, we will get very radical parties, fascist parties, libertarian or liberal parties, free market parties. And I don't really know which of these are going to predominate in the end. I expect coalition governments of various kinds. They will be uncomfortable coalitions. But my best guess is we will move back towards more of a free market, capitalistic, liberal, classical liberal paradigm. That's what I expect to happen. It might not. But either way, I think we will have gone through a cathartic process, which is a good thing and long overdue, and I'm in favor of. So I'm a bit of a Pollyanna. I'm quite cheerful about the problems that other people see in South Africa.
Okay, are you an optimist or are you a pessimist? I hope that Leon Lowe is right. I hope that South Africa doesn't make the same mistake as Zimbabwe did. But one thing we can all agree on, racism against blacks, against whites, it's bad. I don't care what the elites have to say. Thanks for joining, and join us next time. Kibbe on Liberty.